Christmas is the season of holiday greetings. We greet people and take our leave of them by offering them holiday wishes. We send cards to wish them the best for the holidays and the new year. And if you still haven't gotten your St. Bernardine's Christmas cards, it's never too late. Now, our greetings may be filled with all kinds of good wishes. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Joyful New Year. But I doubt that many of our wishes invite family and friends to exult, our final word of the Advent season. Now, in our gospel today from St. Luke, we hear what is perhaps the most famous greeting in all of the Bible. The greeting between Mary and Elizabeth. We'll be looking at Luke chapter 1, beginning on verse 39. But before we actually look at this passage, we need to know what happened in the passage immediately before. In that passage, St. Luke tells us that the angel Gabriel came to Mary in Nazareth, and he told her that she would bear the Son of God. And in that exchange, Mary also learns that Elizabeth, her cousin, is with child as well, even though she had been thought to be barren and she was advanced in years. And after this exchange, Mary agrees to follow the will of God. Be it done unto me, she says, according to your word. And with that, the angel departed from her. And then St. Luke tells us, during those days, Mary set out and traveled to the hill country in haste to a town of Judah, where she entered the house of Zechariah and greeted Elizabeth. Now, Luke doesn't tell us why Mary rushed to Elizabeth's house. It could have been that Mary was so delighted with her own news of her own pregnancy that she couldn't wait to go and tell Elizabeth. But that doesn't seem very likely, since the trip would have been at least 100 miles for her. And she travels in haste, so there's a sense of urgency about her getting to Elizabeth. No, it's probably more likely that Mary is filled with the joy of Elizabeth's pregnancy, and filled with that joy wants to rush to be with Elizabeth, to care for her at this time before her child arrives. And when she does that, St. Luke tells us that when Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the infant leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth, filled with the Holy Spirit, cried out in a loud voice and said, "Most blessed are you among women, and blessed is the fruit of your womb." Now, I hope as Catholics we all recognize that to be the words of the Hail Mary. That despite some of our other friends, that prayer is based in the Scriptures. And Elizabeth continues, "And how does this happen to me, that the mother of my Lord should come to me? For at the moment the sound of your greeting reached my ears, The infant in my womb leaped for joy. Now, Luke crafts this passage brilliantly because on the surface, it seems like there are only two characters in this story, Mary and Elizabeth. But, Dylan wants to say, is that the only two characters?
No.
Who else is there, Dylan?
Jesus and I think it was, I forgot the other.
It was Jesus and John the Baptist are also characters in the story, right? And for as much as there is this greeting between Mary and Elizabeth, the real greeting that is occurring in the story is the greeting between John the Baptist and Jesus. Because not only is Elizabeth thrilled that her cousin is visiting her, but John the Baptist leaps with joy in his mother's womb that Jesus is present to him as well. And what keeps the whole scene together is this sense of joy. And a sense of joy that is not just simply an emotion or a feeling that the characters have, but a sense of joy that bursts into action. There's leaping for joy. There is embracing. There is haste as Mary rushes to Elizabeth's side. All of this is what we call exultation. You see, because while joy is a disposition that we find deep within our hearts, exultation is joy in action. It is a joy that is so great that it cannot be contained within us, that it has to burst forth from us and be shared with those around us. So that when we exult, we not only feel joy in our hearts, we share our love and our care with others so that our joy may be theirs. Now, it's important to know that joy is very different from happiness. Happiness is simply a feeling or an emotion. It comes and goes from us based on the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So, if something good happens to me, I feel happy. And if something bad happens, well, not so much. But joy, on the other hand, is an attitude or a disposition, a way of being that is rooted deep within us. We cultivate it over time, and it remains with us even though our circumstances change. It is quite possible to feel unhappy and yet to be joyful at the same time. Now, unfortunately, our society tends to look for happiness. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? But if happiness depends on our current situation, then if we're always looking for happiness, we must always be manipulating our circumstances in order to find that happiness. If we think that stuff makes us happy, then we're always trying to increase the amount of stuff that we have. We think that relationships make us happy, so we enter into one relationship to feel happy and then abandon it for another once we no longer feel that way. We think that money makes us happy, So we try to get more and more of it, even gambling with it, hoping to hit big. The problem is that in a finite and limited world, we also believe that there's only so much happiness to go around. There's only so much stuff out there, so many relationships, only so much money. And so we begin to compete for happiness, for the things around us. We become selfish and greedy, all in search for happiness. And isn't that what we've been witnessing these past couple of years in our society? Isn't building a wall on our Mexican border really about keeping those people out? People who are trying to come into our country and take our things that make us happy? Isn't a foreign policy of America first really about abandoning our allies and no longer cooperating with them so that we no longer have to share our resources with them, so that we can have as much of the pie as possible, as much happiness as possible? Isn't the slogan of "Make America Great Again" really about stripping from minorities and women what little wealth and power they've attained over the years and giving it back to white men who had it first, who were happy before all those others began getting into the act? You see, when we search for happiness, when we look for things that will make us happy, we often end up feeling the exact opposite. We end up in fear, and fear leads to greed, and greed leads to isolation, and isolation leads to loneliness. Not very happy at all. Ever wondered why Trump and his supporters are always so angry and miserable? Because they're looking for happiness instead of looking for joy. You see, Mary and Elizabeth in today's gospel teach us that joy comes from one thing and from one thing alone. That's right. Recognizing what God has done for us in Jesus Christ. It's not in having wealth or power. As two women of simple means in the first century, Mary and Elizabeth certainly had neither power nor wealth. It's not in competing for scarce resources. If anything, Mary and Elizabeth are eager to share what little they have with each other. It's simply about recognizing that God is with them and working out something great in their lives. And that recognition not only brings them joy, it causes them to exult, to act on their joy. When God is the source of our joy, we don't need to find happiness in stuff or relationships or money. We can find joy deep within ourselves. When God is the source of our joy, we don't have to hoard or hold on to everything. We can freely share it with others in service and love. In fact, as people of faith, shouldn't we measure our success not by how much money and stuff we have, but by how much care and love we show and share with others? Do we look out for one another, keeping in touch with those around us, making sure they're all right if we don't see them, reaching out to see if they need help? Because isn't that what Mary did for Elizabeth? Are we mindful of the different generations among us? that our younger folk need to be attentive to the needs of our aging members, and that our older folk need to mentor and cultivate leadership among our younger members, willing to share or even hand over the reins to the next generation. Isn't that what Mary, who was only a teenager, and Elizabeth, who was clearly her elder, isn't that what they were doing for each other? Do we take acts, both individually and collectively, as Deacon Paul spoke about last week, to make this world a better place, confident that God is working out something great in Jesus Christ? Isn't that what Mary and Elizabeth and even John the Baptist did in the gospel? Recognizing what God has done for us in Jesus Christ is the only thing that can bring us lasting joy. And lasting joy that bursts into action leads to exaltation. And exaltation frees us to live in love and service of one another. Elizabeth concludes today's gospel by saying to Mary, "Blessed are you who believed that what was spoken to you by the Lord would be fulfilled." And isn't that what our Advent journey has been all about? God has made a promise to bring all things to righteousness and justice in Jesus Christ. And because we can believe that God's promises are reliable, we can hope that cooperating with God will lead us to the righteousness and justice he promises. And that hope brings us joy, that we can be part of a better world, one person, one action at a time. And that joy bursts into exultation as we share that joy in love and care of others. You see, promise leads to hope, hope leads to joy, joy leads to exultation. And exultation is its own blessing, because it's a joy that bursts into action for love and service of others. Blessed indeed are we who believed that what was spoken to us by the Lord would be fulfilled. And so on this last Sunday of Advent, I leave you with this greeting. A Merry Christmas to you, a Happy New Year, and most of all, a joyful life full of exultation. Amen.